I sometimes forget and I end up doing a cry. So there we go. The recording will be going on.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm so excited to dive into this with you, Ali. Like it's gonna
Yeah.
be great. So when you give me the thumbs up, I guess I'll start.
Two thumbs up right here.
Beautiful, man. Thank you. Hello and welcome. My name is Tiffany Farag, and welcome to Get to Know You, a podcast for those who want to open conversations and access deeper dialogue, where conversations can become stronger when we explore our thinking and behavior. Every Tuesday, a new question will be asked to a guest speaker. Genuine people here to have insightful conversations. My guest speaker today is from Egypt, currently living in Toronto. He is a full time podcaster, social entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and the Middle East mental health ambassador. His team founded EmpowerMag.com, the first mental health magazine in the Middle East, winning Harvard's top 7 most impactful social initiatives in 2019 and earning recognition from the World Health Organization. Currently, his purpose is to empower youth to become more impactful changemakers in the world. He is also the host of Empathy Always Wins, the world's exclusive youth leadership podcast focusing on empathy and community building. Living in Toronto, he currently consults social enterprises and changemakers on strategy to help build powerful communities. Over the past 3 years, he has given mental health in the Middle East a stronger voice, developing an online magazine platform of 70,000 plus users. He continues to rally his voice and efforts around empathetic leadership and greater mental health advocacy, actively speaking at the World Health Organization and across international conferences. He currently leads the Minas Online Podcasting School and the Art of Podcasting in collaboration with Microsoft for Startups, where he teaches brands and entrepreneurs how to create successful shows to 10 times their audience growth and influence as part of their marketing strategy. Welcoming Ali Salama to Get to Know You. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a
So great to
pleasure.
have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Tiff. I'm very grateful to be here.
Thank you so much. I think it'd be really lovely to hear about, I guess, over the last 3 years that you've been the mental health ambassador for the Middle East. How has mental health or the impression or perspective of it shifted, do you think? Or have you seen it shift in the last 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has uh, become a lot more normalized. There's still a long way to go, but within a certain community, the community that the English spoken community, the you could say the westernized communities that are very exposed, the Arab westernized communities, the ones that are very exposed to the Western world. I think they've started to really understand the concept much more in a much more cohesive and effective way. And while there still remains, of course, a taboo or a stigma, many are much more comfortable understanding that, whatever that they're going through isn't some sort of demon or isn't some sort of, you know, what was typically stereotyped as something that was completely fundamentally like scary or wrong. So that is a huge step by its own definition, but we still have a lot more to go in terms of reaching the mass and the Arabic population, whereby the less fortunate who aren't really exposed to the Western world and aren't exposed to the ideologies and philosophies, uh, you know uh, do not have simply that reference or do not have that person to point their fingers up to and say that yes, they've overcame that, then I can too, and no matter where I am, I can also get out of there. So I think we're just to wrap that point up, we're in a very good position, but we still have a lot more to go, and that needs a lot more investment from public authorities and those governmental sort of officials there.
Sure. Do you think the I guess the shift or the understanding or the better, it's not so taboo in with many people? Is it relative to generations? Do you think it's mainly the youth who are opening their eyes and are able to see clearly, but whereas the older generations are still in that kind of closed mindset towards mental health?
Yeah, I think that there's to a large extent and to a big degree, um, I'd have to answer that question with a solid yes, because the younger generations are more connected. They're more open to different, theories and perspectives. and ideologies, of course, due to the centralization around social media, and the mediums that we're exposed to. The older generations sort of have a much more fixed and rigid way of thinking, and their belief systems are very much so different. So of course you do find a lot, and that's a big cause of a lot of the mental health challenges today, because there's a lot more exposure within youth, of uh, of how the world is and how the world could be, and the older generation simply do not see the same internal world that we see, and that by itself causes a lot of friction within families and stuff. So it's a big conversation, but I think we're moving towards we're trying to close this gap constantly, but it does take time, and with time you do also need to be very aware of how to continue raising awareness in a sustainable manner. And that's really the biggest question there. How can we uh, you know close the gap, and not offend the older generation, but not also discredit the feelings or the way people of sort of our age, the under 30 and even 30, 31 to 35s, see the world, because millennials and Gen Zs see the world very differently to the baby boomers.
Yeah, as you're saying, what comes to mind there is that I don't know, like I don't think it's threatening to them, because obviously the older generation is going through mental health problems. Is it more like they're not aware of it, or are they considering themselves like there's something wrong with me, I'm crazy? What these kids, what the Western world talks about, and it's probably identifying or naming these certain mental health problems. To them, it's like they can't align with it, but they must be aware with it. I don't think it's really kind of going against their beliefs or their views, or threatening that, but it's more kind of trying to help them, allow them to identify what it is they could be feeling or going through, or that health problem, it be depression or anxiety or whatever it may be, or their bipolar or their schizophrenia or whatever it is. So I don't know if it's more of them coming to terms with, hey, I've got this problem, it's physically, you can't see it, but it's called depression, or they don't want to, or they'd rather just have the generalized term of, oh, there's something wrong with me, and they don't want to exactly know what it is. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, and it's a very complicated subject, because we're talking about generational trauma here, and it's they've held it in for so long that it just the lines become so gray, right? And
Mm,
a lot, especially for men, some men aren't just used to talking in the way that the men of my age. Like I come out as a very open, vulnerable person. It doesn't make me homosexual, as the older generation would think, because that means you're displaying feminine qualities. No, I'm displaying empathetic qualities that allow people to be more comfortable around me, right? And I think that this is where the disconnect and the misperception and around around perceiving people who are vulnerable, open. Leadership qualities have changed over time, and now we're starting to embrace leaders who are much more authentic, especially during this time. And I think the older generation has a problem with that, because they don't see how now work and life, they just simply go together. It's no longer life is no longer like before, and that's why mental health is very important for us to not just speak and talk about. It's important that we, as we said before the show, it's so important that we practice also what we preach. It's so important that we also express and understand ourselves. And I think that, it's one thing to be called a manager, and it's one thing to have a title, but it's another thing to actually lead in your life, and be a leader within your life, within your circle, and have that voice. I think that is the biggest takeaway I've learned, because not everybody that is a so-called leader leads. And leaders sometimes are sometimes the ones that choose to take an action out of empathy. I think the world is in need of more leaders that, feel for other people, leaders that people can resonate with and can, point their fingers to and say, hey, this person gives me hope because they are expressive and they are not ashamed, because shame is such a big thing when we talk about mental health. And it's something that I think I'm constantly working on.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's what comes to mind. There is the this book called the Athena Doctrine, and how they were saying that because of this shift and the generations of ourselves, we don't want to, people don't want to stay or work with somebody who disrespects them or talks down to them or is arrogant or things like that. So vulnerability and all these empathetic traits, what is society considers feminine traits, because it's been like, if you're moving up in the world, you tend to have more of an arrogant, you're confident, you're more, I guess, dominating, and these were considered male traits. These traits aren't desired anymore. What traits in leadership that are desired are empathy and vulnerability, and that's where the change is going to happen. Nobody now, the youth are like, well, if I'm not being respected or I'm being spoken down to, I don't feel good at my work, I'm going to leave. The youth now, our generation, is like, I don't need to stay in this, I'll just leave. So I think that's where leaders now are recognizing that and able to realize, hey, these traits aren't liked anymore, they're not favored. I need to be more vulnerable, I need to be more empathetic with my employees and other. That's what, how a community and how businesses and growth and creativity and innovation will develop. So yeah, it's a great point that you pointed out there. And another thing that comes to mind is talking about men and how that's not considered. I wonder too, like, is it just the same with the Middle East women who are from the older generation? Do you think that they're at the kind of the same perception as men about mental health? Do you think it's the same, or is there kind of still a bit of a gap, or maybe women are more able to, in the Middle East, be understanding or open to the ideas of mental health?
I think that's a very difficult, question, because women by nature are more empathetic, right? Like, women are more open when they speak to each other. So I think the underlying question here is do people from the older generation still viewing mental health as something shameful, as something that's blacklists the patient or the client from society. If I have a mental health uh, issue and I go and get treated, will this sort of grandma see me as a person who would have been categorized as normal, or would have been different had I not had that and said that to her? That's a very big question, because I don't think they would see me the same based on their view of the world. But I think you know their children. I mean, people between the ages of 40 to like 50s. The managers, the C-level executives. I think they're much more. I believe so, open to the fact, because I do believe that they're the population suffering the most, and they're the ones carrying the most baggage. And it's so evident now, especially in Egypt, countries like Egypt, where divorce rates are incredible, absolutely ridiculous. And they're the ones that are seeing their children, and they're accepting of all the challenges that are being presented to our society. So if you were to tell me whom out of the generations of, whether it be the kids or the teenagers or the Gen Zs or the millennials versus their parents versus their grandparents are more tolerating of mental health, I definitely, or not non-tolerating of mental health, I tell you definitely the grandparents are still in that frame of mind where you have to not really talk about it, because we want you to find the right partner, and not really
Mm.
have that stigma around you, your future. And I think that's the misconception there. But hey, it's getting better. It's getting better, because I think that this generation is eventually going to be cleansed, in whichever way that comes. And I think that the tolerance is becoming much and much and much more better.
Yeah, yeah, that's fantastic. So I'd love to really dive into a bit more about your podcast, Empathy Always Wins, and
Yeah.
what are you really diving into there? I'm quite curious about that now.
So I truly believe that the winning characteristic of any leader or any person or any brother, sister, mother, partner, significant other, whether it be in business or life or in relationships, it all stems around, you know, uh, truly having uh, and acting in an empathetic manner. And what does that mean? There's always this, notion around, oh, being soft means you're kind, or being too nice is kind of a weakness, or you have to really be dominant, as you said. And you know what, you have to have boundaries, and that's great, but that doesn't mean that you have to come out as stiff and aggressive. And when I talk about empathy and when I talk about empathetic leadership, it's all about really understanding that the person in front of you has a set of emotions, understanding that by listening, actively listening, by being, g- by being empathetic, that is always going to lead you to simply not be more likable, and not only truly win the heart of the person in front of you, but it will also allow you to progress much further in life, because people now want to work and be around people that they like, trust, and feel comfortable. And in this day and age, there's no space for someone to just simply, be around someone, even at work, because they, have a specific title or
Mm.
whatever. Uh, the energy is so important around people, especially during a mental health epidemic that we're currently going through. There's not, like, depression is the leading cause of disability in the world right now, and I think the people that are truly gonna lead by example are the people that will truly care for others, and not just care because it's a requirement, care because it's a trait that they've amassed as a characteristic within their style of leadership, within their personality. So empathy always wins is just truly about caring about other people and developing that skill set to allow you to truly get whatever that is, whether it be your message, whether that be an objective, an outcome, uh, across in a sustainable manner, so you can last and have the greatest impact as a leader or as a person.
That's fantastic. I love that. I love that so much. And with this podcast, you have guest speakers that come on the show, and you're speaking and having conversations with them.
Yes, I did for the first season. I think I do believe that in this season that I'm about to launch, I'm really going to be diving more about into research and, characteristics around empathy. I really want it to be much more educational, so it's going to be one episode around, traits around building trust in your relationships as a leader, and then I'm going to be having a guest. So it's going to be one episode and one episode with guests. But it's just gonna be also, it's a way for me to dive into a topic and into an area of research that hasn't really been tapped into by many leaders out there. And I know Brené Brown is a great researcher when it comes to vulnerability, but as a youth leader myself, if you come to type in empathetic leadership into Google, you won't find many things
Mm,
being being said or spoken or truly written, and you won't find a deeper insight when you dive into there. So I really like the fact that we have an opportunity to really dive and impact people on a level that can allow them to seriously get more out of life. Because when I say winning, or when I speak about winning and empathy always wins, I don't just talk about, money and all these things. I'm talking about winning a better quality life, winning a much more fulfilling life. Because when you win in that manner, you truly have a better impact, and you truly feel wholesome in all aspects of life. And that's really my mantra there.
that's fantastic, Ali. I really, really love that. That's incredible. I guess a great, nice, kind of foundation there for us to dive into the main question of the podcast. So, listeners, the question is, how can we empower man? Now, what was coming to my mind when I was thinking about this question was, why aren't humans empowered? Why aren't we empowered from the get go? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. Why aren't we empowered? I think I think we aren't empowered by ourselves because as we grow from being children to adolescents, teenagers to adults, we pass through so many stages where we need other people. We need that guardian, we need uh, that mother or father or that friend that will hear us out, because there's so many overwhelming emotions that we pass through. Everyone's gone through something that they thought they couldn't come out of. And I think the difference is between some sort of a human being or a person that feels empowered versus the person that feels disempowered is, how was that other person there for them? Did they make them believe in themselves when they overcame, when they had those challenges and they overcame them by themselves? Or were they taught to not feel like they have control or power over changing their situation? I think it's it it's a it's a very sensitive topic there, because you can ask yourself, well, why do people have help that they like? Is someone lucky, or is someone like, is it fair that people have that support versus people that don't? And it's a very very complex question, but I hope I made sense there by sort of tapping into the belief systems of human beings as they grow, because we we are reliant on other people. It's just, how are we choosing those other people? And if we aren't choosing those other people, can we choose the right decisions when we do not have the right people around us to look for the people that we need? It's almost like food or water. If we're in a drought, if we're in a desert and there's a big drought, are we going to always constantly searching for that oasis, or are we just going to let loose and give into the fact that we're just going to die? Because I think that something I always think about is everyone alive out there? Is Do we have to physically die to be dead, or are people out there dead but are still alive? And I think that's something that
That's a
truly.
great point. That's great. I think some people are like waiting to die. They're like, all right, I've done everything now, and they're just waiting. And I'm not talking about older people. I'm talking about even younger people, where they're just kind
Yeah,
of not really living. They're
yeah,
just waiting to, waiting for their time to come. So I kind of understand, I guess, where you're kind of going with that. And what was coming into my mind was, there is self empowerment, obviously. That I my own theory behind this is that you kind of need to be kicked around in life a bit to kind of pick yourself up. And when you pick yourself up, that's when you feel empowered. That's what I guess, my own experience has been. And but then that still doesn't empower you completely. I feel that my own my true empowerment, or when I felt even stronger, was when other people empowered me in a way that they just gave me their time. Now, not just anybody, other people. When I'm talking about other people, I'm talking about someone that maybe I look up to, or I thought was out of reach, out of maybe not giving me an opportunity to have a conversation with them. And when they did, and they kind of spoke to me on their same level, and they kind of were very real and genuine and vulnerable and just humble, that made me that allowance and that openness and that conversation, just a conversation, allowed me and made me feel more empowered about myself. And that kind of, I think it comes from deserving, or that worthiness makes you feel empowered. So it's like two kind of, I guess, steps, or not steps, but processes. This is like, your self-empowerment is one thing, and then the empowerment of other people and their impact, or the way they see or treat you, or give you an opportunity, is another. But I think that that step between the two really is quite significant, because in my mind sometimes too, this is where I think you do feel empowered. Oh, I'm deserving, or I feel, yeah, I am, I know I am, and you don't say negative things to yourself. But when an opportunity arises, when you actually are shown, wow, I'm really deserving in that moment too, or somebody comes and wants to dive into a question with you that you're like, whoa, I didn't think this person would want to talk to me, even, just
Yeah.
relative to the podcast as an example. That was like, wait, I actually didn't think I was deserving before,
Yeah.
until the opportunity came to me now. And now I think I am. So it was just like, sometimes you just even tell yourself things, not because you're not, or not because you're saying to yourself negative things, but they still aren't effective. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's such an important, I think this is ultimately what pulls someone from the disempowered state to the empowered state. It's the intention to want more out of life, to feel that they are capable of more. And I think that's truly what, allows you and I to read more books, and it's that desire to soak in much more of life. I think when we're lost for answers, it's that sense, it's that inner child, that curious person within us, that curious energy that taps into so much more. And I think this is truly what is in between those two states, or in between the self-empowerment and the empowerment of other people. It's the action we take, and that is within our control. And to anyone listening to us out there, it's always, always, always the best investment that you can do for yourself is to ask and keep taking those baby steps day in, day out. And it's so refreshing when you do that. And I think this is sort of leading into the bigger question of how can we empower men, uh, you know by by nature, or by, if we come to look at the history of the word masculinity, um, there are a lot of connotations around that word. There are a lot of stereotypes around that word. We spoke about them a bit earlier in terms of dominance, and in terms of, stiffness. I think that how can we empower men is a two way street. Of course, men need to empower men, but also women need to empower men. Society needs to empower men. Society has to open space for qualities in the ultimate desirable, empathetic, vulnerable man to not only exist but to flourish, and to be recognized as someone that allows, women to become the utmost and to fulfill their potential. I think that the patriarchy that has been drawn uh, is definitely existing. To is We do live in a patriarchal society, but 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 how to change that is is through not only just empowering women, but empowering men to change their perception of women, to change the perception of society, to change their fear around women being powerful, and having those traits. Because I do believe that the confident man is the man that truly, truly, truly isn't inferior around not just women, around anybody. Is the man that has truly mastered the energy, or mastered themselves, and have conquered themselves. And I think this leads to another question that perhaps I'd love to hear your point of view in. How can we, you know, start this education? Because this is an education. This is, we're reforming ways of thought here. We're reforming the DNA of people when they come to think of what is it like being a man. Why are men wired like that? And I do believe that, there are many ways of doing it, including schools, and including, camps, go on when they're young. But my question would be to you, Tiffany, is how do you think, this can be very, 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 very well introduced into society as we enter this sort of next generation of, I believe, women empowerment, leading in business and in so many different aspects of life.
That's a great question, Ali. Like, and I don't think what seems or tends to happen is that women are trying to show men that they're trying to prove why women should be empowered. And it's generally coming from other women. And so I think the men who are able to be vulnerable and who are able to show that a woman is equal to them, and it's like although it does bring out their own vulnerability, like I see that there's a lot of threat relative to a man being able to accept his own vulnerability or his own compassion or empathy, or able to see that they can relate with these different traits. So I said, to me, I feel that it needs to come from other men who are empowered within themselves, but in the right way of empowerment. See, sometimes people, I think, would kind of say that men are already empowered. I'm like, well, men who are unable to allow or to believe women are deserving of empowerment, I don't consider them men empowered. They are not empowered. So I feel like that a lot of the push or a lot of the education needs to come from men who are quite educated on and quite secure with themselves. That's really what it comes down to. Are you secure with your vulnerability? Are you secure with being empathetic? Are you secure with showing it and being visible, and allowing that part of you to be seen?
Yeah.
If you are, then you are accepting of women who want to be on the same level as you, it be in business or in other things.
Yeah, and I think this is the biggest sort of hurdle is acceptance, and I think that we're battling a history of perceived conception of what a woman is and what a woman can do, and ultimately the definition of gender. And I think when this is truly why I focus on empathy, because if someone, I think empathy is the root core of this characteristic that allows sort of a man to, or especially when I speaking from a masculine sort of angle here, that allows a man to break their normal stereotypical notions into understanding why why is this topic important, when we truly dive into the psychology of, you know feeling for other people, when we then this becomes a positive byproduct of so many other things. But if we go into, a conversation and just simply just attacking a man by the notion that they view, women, or feminism, or whatever that may be, then you're gonna find a defensive mechanism always being, triggered there. And that's why I really like to tackle things from like a non-direct but yet an effective manner, because that way, when you come to speak about that, whatever that is that you're speaking about, you've armed that person in front of you because you're empathetic. And that's an also empathetic way of thinking, because you know that they see, feminism as this angry, whatever. You know that you won't approach them in that manner, but you will approach them in a manner that, hey, would you like to, make, meet X goals in your whatever? Then how about, have you ever thought of active listening? Have you ever thought of, seeing things from this perspective? And they'll be more likely to be inclined. And then when they are practicing these different things, you can then enter a sensitive topic in baby steps. And that is the way to win those people in those positions that can then reform the educations in institutions, because they will see the importance when they are approached in the right manner. And I think that it is the way that I truly believe that we will see change once we just adopt this notion of thinking from the other person's perspective and knowing how to influence truly by doing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what do you find when you're, I guess, conversing with somebody from, like we said, generations? This is the, it's very different for each generation how they look at women being empowered or feminism and things like that. So I guess, where do you see yourself being effective when it comes to these different generations. Like when it's with the youth, I think they are more able to see perspective than the generation above that, or even the generation above that, or where they're able to see, men and women are on the same level or are equal.
Yeah.
Or
I
how
think
can
that,
you be effective with that older generation, I guess, who tend to be the ones in power at the moment, who do have control of creating more of a kind of systemic change?
yeah, I think you have to approach people who are in power from the lens that they view the world. What does that mean? That means that, that means start where they're at, see where they're at, understand how different they view our world, and be agreeable with them to start. So if they believe that, they think, for example, women are much more effective at emotional making decisions out of emotions, then start from there and try to build on blocks. Well, if women are able to have better emotional regulation, then don't you think that with emotional intelligence that they could lead a team that is, for example, uh, experiencing an emotional trauma much better than a man, because they do have that sense of empathy. Then you might see someone who traditionally doesn't see women as leaders agreeing with you, and then you're like, aha. And then you're like, well, with that being said, do you not see that the work could be so stressful at times, and therefore women could be a little bit more, not just comforting, but understand the pressures of her delegates or her subordinates much better. And then that is the way to open a conversation. But just diving in and into someone's straight head front, head butting a core belief that they have within themselves, isn't always going to work out. But I think that is a good way to start. And that was just one example. There's so many other examples that people could adopt from this one example. And I hope
Yeah.
this helps out a little bit.
Yeah, that's really great. I really like that. What I see here is that, as you mentioned, because women are better at maybe emotional regulation, as you're talking about, and as a lot of I think so, empowerment comes from your EQ, your emotional intelligence. So it seems that until we're able to increase emotional intelligence with a lot of different people, it doesn't mean just because you're intellectually intelligent or you are educated means you're able to see or accept that we all should be equal and that we should empower women. So in regulating or increasing somebody's emotional intelligence, the angle to take that would be, like you said, not going head on, but also you can regulate somebody else's emotions if you're able to regulate your own. So even if somebody else isn't and they're quite defensive or coming across or being quite defensive and a bit like abrupt, you can still regulate the conversation.
Yeah.
There's still opportunities to shift the dynamics in the conversation, as long as you maintain your own regulation, as long as you don't buy into that and start acting the same way and mirroring exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, emotional EQ is now starting to, studies have shown, that it is the most, determining factor of someone's uh, fulfillment and success in their life, or especially for managerial positions. It is the most, it is the most determining success factor when it becomes when we see it on a much more holistic level in terms of employee satisfaction. Many more employees are now reporting that their leaders that deploy higher levels of empathetic or emotionally intelligent intellectual skill sets, i.e. by understanding them on a much more deeper level than just by asking the right questions. How are you, by getting a little bit deeper with them, well beyond the surface level of work. Those are the people that truly have better retentions, and have, much more fulfilling work lives.
Exactly, exactly. Like, I what I see is that if you're able to regulate, because there's so many different emotions,
Yeah,
but if we can regulate, I think, anger,
yeah,
and be more aware of how we're expressing it, when we're expressing it, to whom we're expressing it, and be aware of where it's directed, and the goal of the outcome that we're desiring, that's when we can open more conversations.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
where we're able to kind of tackle these problems in a healthier way. Because I think what erupts is because of the defensiveness, it erupts into anger, and you don't go anywhere, and people out of anger or in the heat of a moment do and say things that kind of closes the doors for years to come. Or since, obviously, as you said, we're at the moment we're in a patriarchal world, because there are certain doors that I think have been closed or are not willing to be open based on anger. Really, it comes down to that one kind of emotion. There's a great quote by Aristotle. I don't know if you know it, but I will actually read it out to you. It's relative to anger. It says, anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, this is not easy.
yeah. It's a very wise quote. And a friend of, I know a colleague of mine. She's a New York Times, best-selling author. She's called Leanne Davy, and she has a book called, I think it was called Conflict Debt or something like that. Or the whole book was around how conflict resolution is very important to, resolve in a given moment. There's a coin term she consistently mentioned, and it was called conflict debt. And that basically means if you have a conflict with somebody, and it's kind of like compound interest. When you don't pay a payment right there and then, i.e., when you don't resolve something right there and then, over time, instead of having like a $10 fine that you had to pay, it compounds in interest, so that maybe in 2 months, that £10 or that $10, you eventually pay $200 because you didn't pay it right there and then. Now, that's the exact same thing that happens with any conflict. You start building this weight on, a word someone says or an act that someone has done to you. You keep thinking about it, and you keep, it weighs you down, 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 down. That when you resolve it, like whenever you do, 1 year, 2 years, 1 week down the line, it is magnified to an extent that is beyond what it was at that given moment. So I think it takes a lot of courage, and that stems from vulnerability as well, to solve something whenever something that you feel is, detrimental, or when you feel that threatens you, and whatever that you don't like that happens to you, and that develops a higher degree of trust in your relationship. Because if you feel that you can confront somebody right there and then, not in a manner that is toxic, but in a very empathetic manner, and doing it in a manner that allows you to feel like you have uh, boundaries. If someone says a word that you don't like, you can actually express that in a manner that you build sort of respect between you and them. And when you do that, it's almost you're almost deploying uh, a very, very, very important skill set when we come to talk about empathetic leadership, because you're showing this person that you do you have boundaries. And I think that is a very, very, very important skill set when we talk about setting boundaries, and also understanding that I lost my train of thought there, but it was something that, conflict debt is something that I always think about when we come to think about leadership. And I lost my train of thought
That's all right.
because I was on to something.
No, no, I get what you mean. I get what you mean. Well, you cut out there for a minute. Are you there? Oh, there you go. It cut out for a second.
Yeah.
That's all right. But yeah, I kind of get where you were going with that. I do. I see that if we're able to, what I'm seeing, and I've had this conversation with a friend, was that maybe there are some people who are beyond the ability to understand, or will reach that point where they will see somebody as equal or empower women, or want to even have a conversation like this. But I think many more who are viewing this differently, but are still educated and are able to disagree or sit down and still have a conversation in a respectful manner, as you're saying. I have many friends who are very, we what, maybe we're politically on different kinds of sides of the coin, but they are still very good friends of mine, and we're still able to sit down and dive deep and have a conversation and look at things from other each other's perspective, and they're still very good friends of mine. So I don't see, I see how it can be done, and I think there needs to be this, I guess, you know, don't feel, or don't be quick to assume
Yeah.
because somebody is doesn't have the same viewpoint as you, that they're just going to be defensive, or they're going to be rude, because it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And even if they are rude, you can bring them back down and go, hey, we're talking about this topic. I'm not being rude to you. You're not being rude to me. Let's dive into this, and kind of add to the perspective of this for you to be able to kind of really make a difference in each other's lives or in each other's worlds, even though we're trying to do it on a larger scale. And I know many people say it's the leaders that need to be able to be empowered to empower, for us to all empower each other. Yes, it is the leaders, but for there are not many leaders. There are more people who are not leaders. So
Yeah.
what we also all have a role in empowering each other. We
Yeah.
also all have a role in feeling empowered ourselves. So for us to be able to do that, you have to have these conversations. You
Yeah.
have to, and be respectful. As long as you remain respectful, show perspective or bring perspective to the conversation, it can be done over dinner. That doesn't have to be, you're not in a courtroom, or you're not in a, it doesn't have to be in those kind of edgy kind of environments. It can be done over dinner, and it's important to show these different perspectives, especially with your friends and family, where I think a lot of us tend to want to avoid.
And I think it's so important, Tiff, that having different sets of friends from across different careers, uh, that do all sorts of things. I don't think it's healthy to just limit your circle of friend group to just one, around one career, or around similar traits as you, because I think the beauty of being in today's world and being alive today is that there are so many people, great people, doing different things that have different perspective, that only add to your view of the world, and only that is true wealth. Wealth, when I come to think of being, having a healthy and wealthy mind, and having abundance, when you come to you know add to a conversation, it's about, well, how is this person's view of the world different to mine, and how can his painting sort of, how can I look at his painting and learn something from this person? And when you approach this level of being, of learning from every person you meet, because everyone's a teacher in one way or another. So I think that's a very interesting sort of introspection to have. And I'm always, always, always fascinated by every walk of life, because everyone's story allows you to look deeper into yourself. And that's something that we oftentimes, when we're so overwhelmed with emotions, we fail to look at. And how can you learn something about yourself? That's the one question I always ask myself every single day. How can I learn something about myself from the way this person is living their life?
That's really great. I love that you do that every day. That's fantastic. Do you see that in in people or men empowering themselves, or men empowering men, and women empowering women, and both sides empowering one another, that the main, I guess, I think a part of the reason why there's a struggle to it is that people see perspective as overtaking, instead of, hey, no, is this an added perspective? It doesn't mean it's going to take over your already thought. It doesn't mean it's going to take over. It's going to be a new belief you have to have.
Yeah.
I think that's why they're not able to take a perspective, because they think it's overriding their own belief system.
Yeah, I think, when that's something, Tiff, it's something so common in today's day and age. But I also just think that this is more common because people's belief systems uh, are less sort of ingrained, or are less rigid. I think, when someone is truly confident about what they believe and their boundaries, and no one's thought is going to be a threat to them. But I think, and this is a huge conversation by itself, the identity. uh, so many people right now struggle with identity and struggle to, you know identify as X, Y, or Z. And therefore sometimes some people's thoughts or perspectives come out to be super threatening, where that wasn't the intention. So it's also part of understanding where we are right now, um, uh, to be able to understand why people act in that manner. Because again, if people had set beliefs, and if people knew exactly sort of who they were, I mean, I even impact me as an Arab living in the West. There was a conference at Harvard last year that was all about reimagining home, because people don't feel home in the Middle East. They go back and they're said to be, in this uh, Spanish extranjero, or jawaga in Arabic, or
Yes.
foreigner in English, you know. And then they come back to America, or to Canada, or to the UK, wherever they're from, or whatever they're residing, and they don't see themselves as a native, and like, well, where's home? So of course you'll find a lot of conflicting beliefs when you seriously uh, when the topic around identity is even discussed at Harvard. And how do we reimagine home, and what does home mean? How do we define identity? And so I think this is something, again, coming again from a standpoint of understanding mental health, and all the struggles and challenges and differences between thoughts. We have to really think about how do we see ourselves, and are we open to new ideas? If someone comes with a very different perspective as a man, especially as we talk about, how can we make men or more empathetic, or how can we sort of empower men? Uh, how is a man going to act when he is faced by a very, very, very radical ideology? Will he be tolerant to understand and seek to learn more about what that person and how his mind or how her mind is thinking? Or will they just reject right off the bat what is being said by that individual? And once we sort of understand that accepting other ideologies does not mean that this ideology becomes yours, but it means that you respect that other person in front of you. This is a whole new conversation that we open there, because once you accept the person in front of you despite his or her differences, then we can have different people, different races, different cultures sitting on one table and having a productive conversation. But if there is no respect, if there's no acceptance, then this defeats the whole notion of empathy and empathetic leadership, because the whole point of it is to open up and accept differences. But that doesn't mean that those differences become yours. That means that you have a respectable personality that allows you to connect with as many people as possible, and that decorates you as an individual and as a human being, and it makes you a much more effective and a powerful and a much more non-dominant way, a powerful yet powerless and empowering leader.
That's fantastic. I really, yeah, that's a great point there. And I'm like, I love it. That was a great summary of all of that. I see that, you raised a really great point because people's beliefs aren't so fixed and it feels threatened. So they don't see perspective. And I'm glad that those beliefs aren't fixed. That's a good thing, because they need to be changed. In many cases, they're not. They do need to be changed. But so in that way, I think there's still hope, there's still
Of
possibility, it
course,
can
of
definitely
course.
still happen because it isn't fixed. I think in more people than not, the belief system isn't fixed, especially too, even if you're kind of born into belief systems, which not 99% of us are. Those aren't fixed, and they're not. You tend to grow and develop and come out, as an adult. You sit there questioning things, like you as you are when you were born. You start
Mhm.
from when you're 2 years old. You question everything around you
Yeah,
and everything that kind of is in your environment or isn't, and you seek to know.
of
you
course.
seek to you seek to understand. So I think if you go back to having that mentality, just to understand and seek to know and seek to add. But you don't have to. I think because too, like, human beings struggle with change and struggle with adjusting. Like, even though we're able to adjust, like we have it in us, but everything's always changing around us.
Yeah,
So it's like the only thing that they want to hold on to is a thought or a belief that they have. It's like, this doesn't change, it's constant. It makes them probably feel at peace. They
yeah,
probably feel that, okay, it's not changing. I'm able to feel calm from
yeah,
it because there's so much going on. There's so much unknown. There's so much that becomes unfamiliar, and so they lose that. And so I think if we're able to just let go and just be more in the fact that we need anything to be constant, or we could look for something else to be constant. Like, we could look for or I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe the constant part of that could be, like, I don't know, self just peace or self-worth
yeah,
or desire or deservingness. Like, should we that could be more of a constant thing instead of necessarily a belief
yeah.
or a
Yeah.
belief system.
Yeah, I think, a growth mindset is truly what we're talking about here. A mindset that constantly seeks to learn, absorb, and be nourished with ideas that are always evolving, always evolving. We're always evolving as human beings, and there's nothing set in stone other than what we set ourselves. So if we always sort of have one door in our brains or in our minds always open for new ideas, we're able to grow and flourish. And this is how we always water ourselves. And I think this is a responsibility for everyone listening to this episode. It's what can I do today or tomorrow, or what can I start doing to understand myself better through everything that's around us, whether it's by reading a book, whether it's by asking, ourselves reflective questions every morning, whether it's by practicing meditation, gratitude. There are so many different things that can allow us to understand ourselves better, because when we do that, we understand that other people are also complex human beings, and that we have to, there's no constant in them as well, but they're also evolving, they're also changing. So it allows us to tread lighter on other people, because compassion is a huge factor of truly touching another person's life, because we have to practice that also within ourselves as well. So it's such a very complex topic, but when you bring it down, it's all about, are you seeking to grow as you live every day, because that is the only way that you'll tap into those different avenues of your mind, and truly experience life at a different level. Because I think we're all seeking for new adventures. We're all seeking for great avenues to really tap into different parts of ourselves. And this is truly what I think I'm personally doing in the Middle East with mental health, because it's always been existing. It's just I'm painting a different picture for other people, changing that perception and entering different avenues and showcasing that, you know, maybe it isn't what they always thought. And this is something that I think is very necessary for every person here, to enter more meaningful relationships, to become a little bit more empathetic, for men especially to empower themselves in ways that they never thought was possible. Because, you know, if we're doing this change on a systemic level, then we have to expect, we can't do the same things over and over and expect the same results. So we have to do something different. And this is all about perception and influence. How can we truly influence men to become their best selves while empowering women? That's the open-ended question that I think is going to be the one for everyone to sort of take part in and think about as they listen to this episode.
Fantastic, Ali. Thank you so much. This has been, you just summed it up there. That was really great. Thank you for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. And it's just kind of made me think about so many other things. Like I told you, like to ask my guest speaker, how has this conversation with me made you reflect differently or highlight anything to yourself?
I think it just made me think that there's nothing set in stone. I think that it made me think about my belief systems and how I've you know, made sure that, you know, what I believe is truly my belief, not what I've been given to believe. Right? There's a big difference between being born into believing something and choosing to believe something. I think that is when you live from a core point of intention versus living from a reactive point of just, you know, just reacting to whatever you're given to your life. And I think one is very disempowering and one is very empowering, because you have to choose yourself. You're only given one life. You're only given yourself, and you are full of so many different miracles. You know, the fact that we're breathing every second with, like, God knows how many functions in our subconscious mind that we can't even cognitively think about. There's so many things that, you know, there has to be meaning for my existence. There has to be an intention here. So can I actively make my life now an intention? I think this is what this conversation made me think about, is what are my beliefs and how am I going to make sure that whatever I believe is empowering for me and others, because I have to live with other people. So I think that is truly the answer to your question.
Thank you so much, Ali. I really love that. And Ali, just for our listeners, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Ali Salama, ALLYSALAMA, or via my podcast, which is Empathy Always Wins. And I'd love to, you know, have your thoughts as well on the podcast as we develop it and as we talk more about empathetic leadership.
Absolutely, Ali. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you so much, Tiff. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Get to Know You. If you enjoyed this podcast, rate, review, and share the podcast on Facebook or Instagram. You can tag me at Get to Know You with Tiffany Farrak. In my mission to open conversations and access deeper dialogue, I want to hear from you, listeners. The question again, how can we empower man? Leave an audio, video, or a message on the Facebook or Instagram page of your response to today's question, including your name and where you are from. We will include some different responses in next week's Get to Know You Cafe to further deepen dialogue on this topic. If you have any topics you would like us to discuss, be sure to tag me in a post with your question. Join us every Tuesday on Get to Know You. Thank you, Ali. That was amazing. Man, that was so good. Like the stuff that